And welcome back to our breaking news coverage. I'm Kira Phillips. If you are just tuning in, the IDF spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces is now telling us that tonight it has expanded ground operations into Gaza, saying that Israel will be, quote, acting with great force to achieve the objectives of war. Also, the IDF going on to tell us that they did alert the 229 hostage families that they would be expanding ground operations tonight. We want to continue our breaking news coverage and bring into the conversation our foreign correspondent, James Longman, who's there in Tel Aviv, who has been following this from the very beginning of the war that has taken place against Hamas, which began on October 7th. Our Inez de la Cuetera also joining us from Jerusalem, and also Michael Oren, Israel's former ambassador to the U.S. and former member of the Israeli Knesset, a part of our conversation as well. James, what exactly are you hearing at this hour?
Well, I've just spoken to a family, one of the hostages. This is Al Mogmer, 21-year-old, who was taken from the festival. His uncle, he and I have been speaking today. He's said to me that he has not been alerted by the Israeli authorities, that he did have a conversation with an official today. But that was simply to invite him and his family to a meeting on Monday at the Foreign Ministry. But he was not alerted about an expanded ground operation by the Israeli authorities. I can't speak to the families of the other hostages. We haven't spoken to all of them, but that does seem to contradict what the IDF said in that statement about alerting families of the hostages. It may be that that is an ongoing process, and they are reaching out to them. There are a lot of them, after all, and we know that the communication between the Israeli authorities and the Israeli authorities and the families of the hostages hasn't been as clear or as quick as many of them would have liked. So perhaps this is an ongoing process, and he will be contacted. But I can tell you now that Aviram just spoken to me a few moments ago and has confirmed that he has not heard from the authorities. This is an incredibly worrying time for those families. They have put on a lot of pressure on the government the last 3 weeks to try to stop them from this ground incursion, expanded ground operation, whatever we're calling this tonight, because they wanted a focus on their loved ones. If tonight is the beginning of something bigger for them, it will be a night to really, really worry. But we should kind of really make clear that we don't know that this is a larger ground operation, the incursion we've all been talking about. It may be that it's just the beginning of that, and we'll have to wait and see what exactly does happen. But we've certainly been looking at the situation in Gaza over the course of the day, and it's been getting progressively worse. More than 7,000 people, according to Hamas health authorities, have been killed in ongoing bombardments. The United Nations put out a statistic saying something like 40% of the buildings in Gaza are now no longer livable. There is no fuel, limited water, limited food. It has been sealed off. And in the last hour, we also heard that telecommunications have now been cut. So internet and phone lines. We have been speaking to people in Gaza for the last 3 weeks, trying to hear from them what they're experiencing. And now that is no longer possible at this point. Is that related to what the Israelis are currently doing now in the south, mounting this military operation? It's very unclear. It could be that telecommunications lines have just been damaged by the ongoing bombardment, or there could be another issue. But we've heard from both the telecommunications company and the Palestinian Committee, the Red Cross, that they are now no longer able to communicate with people inside Gaza. So a worrying time for the people of Gaza, and a worrying time for the families of those hostages as they look on to see whether, in fact, Israel is about to launch its ground incursion. Kira.
Michael Oren, let me get you then to respond to what James just said with regard to comms being cut here. Also, the fact that James actually spoke directly with a hostage family who said, indeed, he was not contacted by the IDF. The IDF is saying that the spokesperson said they reached out to the 229 hostage families. So what's the deal here?
I don't know. And families are big. And they may have spoken to certain members of those families, not spoken to the person that James spoken to. I don't know. I know I meet with families. When I meet with families, I meet with uncles and cousins, fathers, mothers, brothers. It's big. I don't know. And speaking frankly, maybe the government, the army hadn't made that statement, should have made that statement before the hostage families were contacted. I don't know. But what I do know is that, Kira, we're in a war. And this war began on October 7th. When thousands of Hamas terrorists, by the way, accompanied by no small amount of Gazan citizens who just participated in this rampage, murdered, burned, mutilated, raped, beheaded, immolated 1,400 Israelis. That's why this has happened. We can't forget that. Israel itself is still very much sort of embedded in October 7th. We hear these stories are coming out one after another. They are just simply unbearable. Many members of the press were shown a 43-minute tape that was taken from the body cams of the terrorists who were later killed, showing what they did to these families. And the most extraordinary thing is that they were proud of this. They actually wanted to broadcast it. Many of these films were then uploaded to Facebook of these families so they could see how their loved ones were dissected, were mutilated. That's what this is. It is a war, and we cannot accept a ceasefire, and we have to remove the Hamas threat from our borders, or this country simply, and I say this as guardedly as I can, this country simply cannot survive.
All right, let me bring in our Mick Mulroy, our national security and defense analyst. He's on the line now. With your experience, Mick, especially in the Middle East as CIA and also Assistant Secretary for Defense, the fact that James just reported, comms have been cut off, phone lines have been cut. We've got the IDF saying they're expanding ground operations in Gaza right now. Apparently, the IDF said 229 hostage families had been contacted about this, but as you heard from James, not every family member has been contacted. So what is, just from your experience, what's your take right now on what's about to happen or is happening at this moment?
So, Kira, I think we're seeing the transition between the shaping phase of their operation into the execution in a ground assault phase. In the shaping phase, we saw limited raids to target specific entities, likely command and control, coming from the ground and the sea. We saw airstrikes also probably against command and control leadership, and to soften the targets up, essentially. And now we're moving into what looks like, and certainly indicated by cutting the power, cutting the communications, et cetera, looking into a larger phase of the ground operation in which they will start moving in major forces into the area, and they don't want them to be able to communicate.
All right. Mick, Inez, Michael, James, thank you all so much. I'm Kira Phillips. We will continue following this breaking news. The IDF announcing ground operations expanding right now in Gaza. 229 hostage families, according to the IDF, have been alerted to this. We'll be right back. More news on the other side.